Listeners, and welcome to this Halloween special of Pop Screen, the Geek Show podcast that covers the good, the bad, and the spooktacular of movies either starring, about, or by pop stars. No, the podcast covers a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a blood-chilling author for... I can't do this any longer. I'm some dick who writes for the Geek Show and Byline Times. What are you, Mark?
I'm also some dick who writes for the Geek Show, and we are Cult. And I said Cult and Horrified, and Z Network, and Arrow Films, and Scarred for Life Volume 2.
Nice. And Mark, you are not a big horror movie fan, aren't you? Even less so after watching this week's film.
I am and I'm not. It's weird. I have tastes when it comes to horror movies, and they don't seem to correspond with a lot of people's idea of. I hate gory, graphic, torture porn, body horror, stuff like that. I'm not a fan. I'm more Hammer horror, or things that have a really interesting mood or atmosphere. Whilst this film is of the era of Hammer horror, it's not really fitting those criteria, is it?
No, not least because is it an Amicus film actually? I forget.
No, it's Tygon.
Tygon, that's it. I knew it was one of Hammer's big rivals, but yeah.
Tygon and IAP, American. What they called American Independent Productions?
American International Productions.
International Productions, that's it, yeah.
So Tygon is not really something that had a stronger brand identity as Hammer or Amicus, but they had some interesting things out. They were very involved in that first wave of folk horror. Witchfinder General and Blood on Satan's Claw were among theirs. But this definitely feels like a sort of watered down version of the things that Hammer would be doing in the early 70s, where they realised that horror was moving more towards contemporary settings rather than the period settings they'd used, but they just weren't in touch enough with what contemporary Britain was like to make that work.
That's true. This is, of course, the wonderfully titled The Haunted House of Horror.
Yes.
Which promises so much, doesn't it?
I mean, on a trade's descriptions level, I think you can get it on at least 2 counts.
This is another of my recommendations to you as well, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
Primarily because you're going through what can only be described as a midlife crisis weird phase of watching as many beach movies as possible.
Yes, that's sadly true. Yes.
And the sort of common ground between the American sort of beach blanket bingo movies and this, as you say, contemporary late 60s Tygon horror movie is, to quote the film itself, the epitome of swinging London, Frankie Avalon.
I'm so glad you picked up on that line because, I mean, there's a lot of British movies from the 60s and 70s that cast an anomalous American just to bring the cash in, but they don't rub it in your face like that, do they?
Mean, to give Frankie Avalon some good grace, he looks positively embarrassed when that line of dialogue is uttered. It's like even he knows, and he's not that good an actor to sort of front it out. He just sort of goes, yeah.
I think Frankie Avalon's strong suit as an actor, and I say this having, as Mark has said, gone through much of his over the summer, is that he just seems like a good sport. You give him any silly thing to do in a beach party movie, and he'll absolutely throw himself into it. He doesn't seem to take himself seriously at all, and it's why he is so hilariously miscast in
Yeah,
this.
it's a strange one. I mean, this film has a really interesting pedigree. It's written and directed by Michael Armstrong, who apparently was writing this screenplay when he was a teenager. So it dates back to at least a decade before this. He apparently saw Psycho and then thought, well, the game's up. I'm going to have to really rewrite and overhaul this because everything is done. You can't top Psycho.
Yes.
I need to really concentrate and try and do something with this. He
Yeah.
originally called it The Dark, which is a much better title.
Oh boy, yes. Yeah.
Even though the film as stands isn't particularly dark. It
No.
wants to be in certain places, but it's not. Let's face it, this is Scooby Doo, isn't it?
Totally, yeah. I mean, I will say there are moments where you can see that this is made by someone who had a fire lit under them by Psycho, and I was pleasantly surprised that after, as you say, being Scooby-Doo for all of the preceding runtime, the first kill is surprisingly good, nasty, protracted. There's a good sort of
There's a lot of Kensington gore, isn't there?
there's a good audio visual idea when
Yeah.
the cassette player that's playing a track while the murder's happening comes to its end, and you hear the sort of flick, flick, flick of the tape run
Yeah.
out as the knife comes down. I think, there's good set pieces in it, but Armstrong really should have got someone to collaborate on with the script, which is surprising as he became more prominent as a screenwriter than he ever would be as a director.
Well, you could argue that there was a collaborator on this script, but only after the film was made. This is a real. I mean, I don't know if you watch this film thinking, "Hang on a minute, this doesn't make any sense." And the reason it doesn't make any sense is because it's not because it's shit, even though
I was going to say it's a Tygon movie from the late '60s. I did notice it didn't make any sense, and it didn't strike me as unusual.
But it doesn't make any sense primarily because there was such a fight going on behind the cameras.
Right.
It's American International had a lot of say in what they wanted from this particular movie.
Right.
And what they saw in Michael Armstrong's film was not what they wanted. They wanted, they wanted two American stars. And insisted on either Frankie Avalon or Fabian, who was another music star in America at the time, wasn't he? Whereas originally Michael Armstrong wanted Ian Ogilvy, who had just done Witchfinder General for Tygon.
Of course he had.
Ian Ogilvy was going to be the epitome of swinging in London.
I can buy that.
Yeah, I mean, he'd just come off the back of Witchfinder General. He'd done something very similar for the same director, Michael Reeves, with Boris Karloff. What was that one called now? The Sorcerers?
Oh, yes.
That was a sort of decadent hipster in swinging in London. So that would have been really interesting. But no, IAP wanted two American stars. They wanted a musical number.
Okay.
Yeah, don't know why. They wanted two more killings than what the film originally had.
And was this run by Henry Portrait off the League of Gentlemen by any chance?
And then they didn't like the ending or the reasons for why the killings were happening, so they wanted a completely new exposition for it. So none of this makes sense. So what they did was they got in touch with another director whose name should be on my terrible notes. Gary Levy, aka
Okay.
Peter Marcus, who was asked to rewrite, reshoot, and recut the film. Now, to do this, he added everything at the beginning of the movie, which includes the scenes at the pub called The Case is Altered, which is a 17th century pub in Middlesex. That is its genuine name, The Case is Altered, which I
Okay.
always find really interesting. So all that stuff at the beginning, where they're in the pub, and they have a sing-song round a piano and a bit of dancing going on, that is all new in the film. That also ticked the box of IAP who wanted a musical number.
Okay, well, that's an elegant way of getting around it, I think.
It's that sing-along, yeah.
Yeah.
The stuff on Carnaby Street is all Gary Levy stroke Peter Marcus.
I can buy that.
That was never in the script. In fact, George Sewell, who plays the character of Bob, is completely made up in the rewrites. He had no involvement with the film prior to this at all.
That makes sense because he is weirdly outside of any of the main action, isn't he? He keeps threatening to come into it, but he never does.
They put him with is it the
Gina
Sylvia
Warwick.
character, Gina Warwick? Yeah.
Yeah.
So all their scenes were shot months afterwards, by all accounts. In fact, George Sewell was asked to be in this film in a lay-by. I don't know how this happened, but apparently he was in a lay-by and asked to appear in the film. He had no idea what the film was about, and the character was named Bob Kellett, which is the name of a British comedy director at the time.
Okay. I mean, Sewell's character, I think, is interestingly miscalibrated because he's
really miscalibrated.
Yeah, he's like Sylvia's partner, and it's in the script that there's an age gap in the relationship, and that's a source of tension. It's like, okay, but the age gap, there's a gap and there's a chasm. And I think when you cast George Sewell, a man who was born looking, like he'd been smoking 60 a day for the past 58 years, you've really made it into a chasm.
Absolutely. I mean, he's a wonderful actor, George Sewell. I really love him as an actor. I think there's a sort of solidity about him, isn't there, in everything, and a natural thing, which comes from Joan Littlewood, Ken Loach. He did all those sort of. Apparently, one of the Crays' favourite actors.
I can believe that. I can imagine them watching him in Get Carter and thinking, "Oh yeah, that's our guy."
Yeah, it's just perfect in it. And like you say, he's just got that face of a man who, I don't know how old he was there, but he looks about 45, doesn't he?
He always did.
He
always
looked about 45. I mean, I think he's clearly younger than the part is written, but it doesn't matter because he looks old. And you put him in his sort of trench coat in Carnaby Street with a trilby on, and he just looks like a completely different generation.
You do wonder if his chat-up line to Sylvia involved, like, coming into the back of his van to see some puppies.
But I love the fact that he says, "I didn't know what this film was about." It's called The Haunted House of Horror, mate. I mean, it's not difficult to put two and two together on this,
Although there isn't a fucking haunting in it.
No, that is it. Yeah. That is true. He could say, "I didn't get what this film was about."
Yeah.
I'm with him. I didn't know what this film was about is slightly different, I think. The other thing that had to be added into this film, but it was added in whilst Michael Armstrong was still doing it. And that was, again, from IAP. They wanted a part for Boris Karloff. Just completely at random. Can you get us a part for Boris Karloff? So, he's obviously looked at his script and thought, well, there isn't a part for Boris Karloff, but I'll write a bit involving a police detective.
Yeah.
And that police detective was later played by Dennis Price in the film for the reason that Boris Karloff was too ill to be in the film at this point.
I wonder if there was some thought to making Sylvia's lover a bit younger, a bit more fresher faced, and you could get Karloff in for
Could have
that.
got Boris Karloff for
Definitely.
that, couldn't you? Yeah, that would have made more
Yeah.
sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But originally, at IAP's insistence, the police detective was going to be a massive part in this movie and a huge red herring. He was going to be wheelchair bound to accommodate Boris Karloff's ill health.
Yeah.
And he was going to be just wandering around the house, sort of screaming, ranting, and raving.
I mean, that would. The film has not turned out perfectly, to put it very mildly, but that would have been disastrous if it was asking you to believe that the police had put their dodgeriest and maddest man on this case.
Right. The best thing is when they realised he was too ill, they said, "Well, can you write it as a narrator? Can you give him like narration duties?" There's no need to have it. You know, you're asking me to write a film, or I've written a film about a bunch of hip 20-somethings in swinging London at the height of the 60s, and you want a very old Englishman to narrate it. It's a strange call, isn't it? So they gave the part to Dennis Price, and I think he did film a lot of it, a lot of the scenes in the house, but nobody was happy with it, and they got rid of it. So his role is extremely cut down completely, to the point where you think, what was the point anyway? So that's another reason why this film doesn't make much sense in those sequences. Armstrong's original vision was the whole film was going to be near as damn it, the whole film was going to be in the house.
Yeah.
There wasn't really any sequences outside beyond what he had to add with the police detective character. So the scene in the club, I think, was always there, where he goes to sort of gently interrogate Frankie Avalon and Gina Warwick. You know, I think that scene always existed. But really, the whole film was supposed to be in the house, which again might make sense calling it the haunted house of horror. You're literally set in a house, you know.
Yes.
But yeah, it's such a weird film. The original reason for the killings is the character of, I mean, we'll give it away, won't we? Richard is responsible
for...
for...
yeah, give it away. Come
Richard
on.
is... Nobody wants to watch this.
No.
Richard is responsible for the killings. Richard has a very interesting... Cast-wise, Richard has a very interesting setup, because originally Armstrong wanted David Bowie for the part, because he'd just done a film called The Image, a short film. I don't know if you've seen The Image. It's a weird... If you told me that's how David Bowie came to be, I'd believe you. It's
Lindsay Kemp, isn't it? The Image, or am I thinking of something else?
I think Lindsay Kemp did his sort of movement.
That must be
his movement teaching for it, yeah, because it's a drawing that comes to life, and Bowie's the drawing that comes to life, and Michael Byrne is the artist, and he has to sort of kill his own creation. It's a very interesting sort of Frankenstein monster type thing. It's really well shot in black and white as well. So he wanted David Bowie for the part of Richard. IAP, who had argued that, you know, the epitome of swinging London had to be an American actor, and they went for Frankie Avalon, were then appalled that they were going to get David Bowie, because they thought there'll be a clash there. People won't take Frankie Avalon seriously if you've got this really interesting, slightly dangerous...
I mean, for once, they are not wrong, are they?
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine how that would have played out? It would have just been a weird clash of cultures. I mean, it would have shown up Frankie Avalon for this weird 50s reject, in a supposedly hip contemporary setting. So he didn't get his way with David Bowie. He went for Noel Janus instead, who is Samantha Janus's dad.
Right.
But apparently Noel Janus wasn't a member of Equity, so that fell through. Apparently the part was originally written for Peter McHenry as well, but I don't know why he wasn't sort of cast all along. They ended up casting Julian Barnes, who was originally cast in the role of Henry, a much smaller role in the film. So they had to do a bit of swapping around there. But yeah,
What one must just briefly clarify that it's not that Julian
no, not that
Barnes.
Julian Barnes. No. This Julian Barnes is. I mean, people say that David Bowie wasn't a good actor, but Christ. This Julian Barnes is like a plank of wood, isn't he?
He is dreadful. Yeah,
He's a
absolutely.
very fey. He's certainly a very good-looking young man. He's a very fey. Yeah, he's got a look about him, but it's
Nothing
fey.
more.
Yeah, it's a fey performance as well, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, his original motivation for the killings is that it's a homosexual subplot.
That's interesting.
And apparently, Michael Armstrong was, when he watched the film, just couldn't understand why all that had gone. And he's suddenly talking about a dead brother that never existed in his original screenplay whatsoever.
I think there would be an interesting kind of circularity to that if that had gone in, because coming onto this as someone who has just been watching a load of AIP beach party movies, one of the things that struck me about that is that it opens with what is, I think, supposed to be the sound of someone having a panicked freak out off camera, but which sounds unmistakably sexual.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I thought, oh, right, that's really funny, because the beach party movies are the most famously, like, determinedly sexless film
Chaste,
franchise in
yeah,
film
yeah,
history. They make
yeah.
the Marvel Cinematic Universe look like Pasolini. And it would have been nice to just sort of corrupt, Avalon's image more thoroughly, which this doesn't do at all, really.
But he gets stabbed in the cock and balls at the end.
He does, doesn't he? I thought, but did I see that right?
Which again, I imagine is the homosexual subplot.
I guess now you've said that, it makes more sense. I mean, my assumption is that jabbing a knife into Frankie Avalon's crotch will just bend the knife. I imagine he's like a Ken
It's a
doll
Ken doll.
down
Yeah,
there.
yeah, it is. I mean, his job is beach, as we know.
Yeah.
Literally, this is that man's job. And now he's in this weird sort of Scooby-Doo slasher movie in England.
Yes.
It's very strange. This does have a really interesting cast, though, doesn't it?
It's got a wild cast, yeah. I mean,
it's got a wonderfully wild cast. Another pop screen sort of connection here is Mark Winter, who plays the first victim, Gary. He sang Venus in Blue Jeans, Go Away Little Girl.
of course.
So
yeah.
he was big news in the music industry. You've got Jill Haworth, who played Sheila, who apparently was on drugs throughout the film.
Oh right. I mean,
Whether that was,
I can
whether that
understand
helped.
needing a bit of an anaesthetic. Yeah. Jill Haworth does not have, as far as I'm aware, a music connection, but she has a musical connection in that on stage she originated the role of Sally Bowles in Cabaret.
Yes, I believe so. Yes, yeah. She was a very attractive woman as well.
Stunning.
There's
Yeah.
some wonderful sort of. It's not the term to say nowadays, but back then it was de rigueur. Dolly birds. These are dolly birds, aren't they?
And I think you can't quite get out of that mindset when you watch it, because like that one of those Carnaby Street scenes that they added in reshoots just has like a shop whose only sign is just man's shop. And that's it. I have no idea what they sell. I just know that it's a man's shop.
Sell things for men.
There's nothing for you ladies here.
Go away. Just Yorkie bars and
yes. Sometimes you watch things
Yorkie
set
bars
in
and
the
donkey
past.
jackets.
Sometimes you watch things set in the past and you're like, oh, they're troweling on the chauvinism a bit here, aren't they? And then you watch something actually made in the past and you think, oh, fuck it, never mind. No, they're clearly not.
Yeah. They're actually taming it down, really, aren't they? Gina Warwick, who we've already mentioned, Carol Dilworth, who has a music connection in the fact that she married Chip Hawkes, I should say, of the the Tremolos, which means she is the mother of Chesney Hawkes, the one and
of
only himself.
course.
Yeah.
I can't believe I didn't get that because I was just listening to an Adam Buxton podcast where Chesney Hawkes' name came up. So yeah, he's been on my mind for the first time since 1991.
I actually saw him live.
Did you?
Completely by accident.
You tripped and you fell into a Chesney Hawkes concert.
Literally almost near as damn it, yeah. We was this is going back a bit, probably late noughties.
Okay.
2008 perhaps, something like that. And me and my mate John were in Liverpool, and we used to drink a lot back then. And one of the things we did, it was like a pub crawl. We went from one end of Liverpool to the other end of Liverpool, and it's a big old walk to do. And we got to Concert Square, and there was a lot of really quite scary, as is often the case in Concert Square, certainly back then, it's quite some scary individuals. And it was a summer's evening as well, and I just thought, oh, this looks a bit menacing. Let's jump in this bar. So we jumped in this bar, and there was somebody playing a guitar, and we looked at that. Shit, it's Chesney Hawkes. Literally just playing a guitar in a bar with like two other guys. It was so weird.
For a while, it looked like Chesney Hawkes would have his retirement fund sorted because Duncan Jones kept using the one and only in his movies. But Duncan Jones has been a bit quiet recently, so it's probably been a lean few years at Casa Hawkes.
Casa Hawkes. He does a lot of reality shows now, I believe, doesn't he?
I can imagine that.
I think he's on this new series in Nevermind the Buzzcocks as well, because I'm sure I heard Greg Davies say he touched his mole.
Yeah, I can confirm that because the Adam Buxton podcast I was listening to was with Daisy May Cooper.
Right. Brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant. Who else is in this? Robin Stewart, who would go on to be in, I think, Bless This House, the Sid James, Diana Coupland 1970 sitcom. And then the two stars of this film for me is Richard O'Sullivan and Veronica Doran as Peter and Madge, because they're just this weird sort of Scooby-Doo and Shaggy together, aren't they?
They are, yes, yeah.
They're the comic relief of the group, aren't they? In a weird way. He's a guy who, I mean, Richard O'Sullivan by this point had sort of cut his teeth on sort of, I suppose, the British equivalent of the Beach movies, which was the Cliff Richard films. He was always like one of Cliff Richard's gang, really. Not in Summer Holiday, unfortunately, but in the other ones like The Young Ones and stuff like that, he routinely pops up in Cliff Richard movies alongside like Melvin Hayes and people like that. He's got a one-track mind for drink in this film. Whereas Veronica Doran has got a one-track mind for Richard O'Sullivan in this film. And this is a very misogynistic, fat-phobic sort of depiction of her character, because she's slightly plump, and don't they go to town with that? You know. Her first scene is her while they're all having a sing-song in the pub and dancing. She's sort of like sat on the floor eating sandwiches, I think.
Yes, the famous pub food, the pub snack that we all enjoy.
Yeah, sandwich.
Yeah.
And it's like, shut up and eat your sandwiches, Madge, or something like that. And then when she does dance, one of the Dolly Birds rather snidely says something like, "Ooh, look at her when she's dancing," or something. And you just think, well, at least they're acknowledging that people are bitches towards her, I guess, but it's never developed any further than that, because by the time you get to the house, let's have a 5-minute comedy scene where she can't get her ass through the hole in the wall.
Yes, using comedy in its broadest possible definition.
But you know what I love about this? Veronica Doran apparently said that she was really pleased to be cast in this film because she was getting fed up of playing comedy roles.
I guess playing the comedy role in a horror movie is like,
And also Michael Armstrong knew her very well and cast her in this role. I'd be a bit worried about what your friendship is if you go I'd like you to play the fat woman in my film.
It's sort of like when Gillian Armstrong split up with Peter Morgan, and you think, oh, that makes sense because no relationship can possibly survive the words "I see you" as Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
I would like to think that something very similar happened to Michael Armstrong and Veronica Dorman's friendship after this.
But I mean, they are together. They're quite sweet, I think. Even though the film, when it gets to sort of more, when it attempts to be more serious, because it's a prototype slasher movie, long before sort of the drive-ins of the 70s in America was suddenly sort of like really extolling the virtue of the slasher genre. This is kind of already there, isn't it? Which makes it a film of distinction to sort of consider, but it just doesn't really use the elements of that genre effectively enough.
No, I think the moments where you can see it are those moments I mentioned earlier, where you do have these quite stylish, suspenseful kills.
Yeah, he's very good at kills. It's like, again, it's that sort of stepping stone between the Italian giallo and then the American slasher, and you just got this one little example of English weird twee English horror that's somehow in between them both, and I don't know how that came about, but it did. But yeah, when they try to be serious, I mean, these characters do go through it a little bit. I mean, there's a bit where she's absolutely hysterical after the first kill of the Gary character, and I think it's one of the other. I can't remember which one. They all look the same after a bit in this film, don't they? They all look young and pretty and Scooby-Dooified. That we'll just say one of the Fey ones of the other Fey ones grabs hold of Madge and slaps her in the face for being hysterical. Which is, that age-old tradition of misogyny. It's like, a woman's being hysterical, let's smack her in the face. That will stop her from crying.
Yeah, that'll calm her down.
Yeah,
I'd feel a lot calmer if someone belted me, obviously.
And then what I love is that Richard O'Sullivan comes rushing in, seemingly to his girlfriend's rescue, grabs the bloke who slapped her off her, throws her across the floor, then grabs his girlfriend, shakes her, screams in her face, and slaps. What was this? It's like, you're not doing a good enough job of slapping my girlfriend. I must sort of intervene.
I like to think that he was just kind of keyed up. He slapped one person. It wasn't quite enough, and he was just rolling with it. He just got carried away.
This is a film that also has one of the best sort of quotes in any film you could think of for this time for this film is "Let's have an orgy."
Well, it's not even that, isn't it? It's what do you fancy, an orgy or a seance?
Or a seance.
And it turns out that, I mean, Jill Haworth says she fancies neither, which is when I realised I was going to get along with her character. Because
she was on drugs. She can't be asked doing either of those things. She's off her fucking tits, mate.
She's going to zone out in the corner. But the great thing is, after they've said this, the seance, which is what they go with, just involves them like standing in a circle holding hands. And you think, yeah, I imagine going to an orgy with Frankie Avalon would also look quite a lot like this.
Yeah, there's not much to differentiate between the two, really, is there? But I love that. Let's have an orgy. No, let's have a seance. It's just bizarre. One of the weird sort of insistences from AIP as well was that the characters needed to be harder. Now, given that what this Levy stroke Marcus person incorporated into his film is a significant part at the beginning around that pub where they couldn't possibly be any lighter and softer. I don't know how they thought that passed, because I think the characters are harder in Armstrong's vision. Like you say, you're getting people slapping him across the face and screaming and shouting and genuinely shit scared,
Let's just take a moment to take stock of the instructions from AIP.
Yeah,
the characters need to be harder. there needs to be a musical number.
Right? Yeah.
We've got to get rid of the homosexual subplot, make it more relevant and up to the minute, and cast Frankie Avalon. Oh, and also get that guy David Bowie as far away from this movie as possible.
As possible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pulling in a lot of different directions.
And put two more killings in there that didn't exist in the original movie as well.
Yeah.
Strange. It's so strange. But yeah, I think that possibly might be where this sort of really half-hearted mention of drugs keeps coming into the film. There's a backstory here that they've all been done for a drugs bust or a drug arrest somewhere along, which is the most unbelievable.
Totally.
I mean, these lot couldn't get a pack of Captain Full Strength together. I mean,
maybe that is the drugs bust. Maybe they were just passing a can of Strongbow around each other, and after a while they just thought, "Oh, this is too much. Let's turn ourselves in."
This is like Rishi Sunak's idea of smoking is such a terrifying thing, isn't it? You know, that these nasty delinquents, they probably smoke cigarettes.
Do you think that we've mentioned Never Mind the Buzzcocks? Do you think that Rishi Sunak watches the Donny Tourette episode and does not see the irony in what Simon Amstel is saying?
Oh my God, he's smoking!
He is smoking. I'm glad someone called that out.
Donny Tourette, you could possibly buy a packet of cigarettes under Rashi Balzac's new regime now at this age, perhaps. I love the idea that in 20 years from now, a 39-year-old isn't going to be able to get a packet of fags. It's just sort of throws me completely, that, doesn't it? But yeah, these lot would find vaping sort of taboo, wouldn't they? I mean, they really are Scooby-Doo's the protagonists of Scooby-Doo in this film, aren't they?
Which would be about contemporary with this, and I guess they do have similar missions, don't they? They are both projects that are like, how do we take the two of the big things that the kids are into right now, which is hippiedom and horror, and how do we just make them completely innocuous?
Yeah. I mean, as a live-action Scooby-Doo film, I'm all for this, but like you say, it has this weird schizophrenia in it because, like you said, the kills are very stylish, they're very bloody.
Yeah.
Frankie Avalon, I cannot stress this enough. Frankie Avalon gets stabbed in the cock and balls. Cannot stress that enough.
I mean, it would be a weird moment anyway, but it's weirder because there is like a protracted bit where he seems to be about to talk Richard down from being a psychopathic murderer. And you think, oh, right, I see where they're going with this. It's like the ending of Ian McEwan's Saturday, only less stupid. And then suddenly out of nowhere, cock stab!
Cock stab! I mean, it's almost like, could you imagine in Scooby-Doo? It's like, it's the school caretaker, yes, and I would have got away if it was for you. Oh my God, Scooby just stabbed Freddy in the balls. It's that
and I'm
level.
Gonna make sure you don't have any meddling kids.
And then, of course, you get this Richard character running off, crying as like sirens are going and what have you. And just
it's hard to make an intimidating slasher movie villain who also has a crying fit when the police show up.
Yeah, just a bit, yeah. But again, I mean, I've watched this film a few times. I still can't make out what he's talking about with the dead brother thing.
No.
because
Because there isn't the setup there. There aren't the
no,
pieces.
no.
Yeah.
I'd like you say now you realise that it was a homosexual thing.
Mm.
You could kind of perhaps see the pieces going together a little bit better. Still
I would
shit.
like to. Yeah, I'd
It
like to
still
watch
smacks
it.
of a straight guy going, this is all these gay people, isn't it? This is what these gay people do. They stab each other in the cock and balls.
Well, there's some precedent around the time for that, because this is around the time that Jim Garrison was investigating the murder of John F. Kennedy, an incident that was later portrayed with, I think it's fair to say, a deeply sanitized version of Garrison in Oliver Stone's JFK.
Yeah.
And Garrison's theory as to why his suspect Clay Shaw ordered the murder of JF Kennedy is he said it's a homosexual thrill killing. And I would just like Garrison to break it down to me what he thinks gay people do.
Mind you, I'd like Tommy Lee Jones to sort of break that down to me after watching that film as well, to be honest. Tommy Lee Jones is Mr. Humphreys in Are You Being Served the movie.
But I mean, it's like I don't want to drown this podcast in Barbie references, but when you see the sort of orgy scene in JFK, don't you just expect them to all be gathered around, going, "Well, we've all dressed up. I think we could stay the night and do what? I don't know."
Oh dear me, it's oh god, yeah. I mean, they both come at it from an angle of I'm writing or directing something here that I have no real appreciation of.
Yeah. I think a version, I want to be like very careful before I say a version of this where the murderer was gay would be very good, actually,
Yeah.
because no, in all likelihood, it would make you cringe in a different way
Oh
if you
god,
watched it
yeah.
now.
But it would have
There
made more sense for the
there would
time. Yeah.
there would be some sort of coherence to it. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And it
Yeah.
would even if you could just now watch it and go, well, in the context of folk devils of the time,
Yeah.
you could see where this is coming from. And
Yeah.
Britain as a film industry has a good tradition of completely fucking up and offending people when it comes to making genre movies like this. I mean, there's the wonderful. I mean, I do love this film. I think it's brilliant. Twisted Nerve with
Oh yeah,
Haley
yeah.
Mills and Hal Bennett. But my God, does it not understand Down syndrome?
Yeah.
It's offensive. It really is.
I mean, the whole idea of queer villains in horror is one that, we've mentioned Psycho. That's obviously like
That's
a
where,
huge part.
that's definitely where he's
Yeah,
got it from, isn't it? Yeah,
yeah. But it's existed ever since James Whale at the very least, and you sort of go back and forward. I mean, when I was growing up, people were always protesting movies like Basic Instinct because they had queer villains. And nowadays, I think for all the attempts to drag us backwards, it's hit the point where you're secure enough that you can say, oh, I fucking love James Whale movies. I love Patricia Highsmith novels. I like myself some antisocial, nasty queers, and I think I could probably appreciate Armstrong's version on that level, if
yeah.
nothing else.
I say at least it would have been more coherent.
Yeah, yeah.
The dots could be joined up. It might not have actually made sense
It
properly,
might not have joined them itself, but
but
it would be possible. Yeah,
from a satisfying film point of view, you could see where he's gone from A to B.
yeah, yeah.
As opposed to this A to let's get another guy in who will shoot all sorts of shite around it and then change your ending completely.
Yeah.
Some of the notes I've made as well is some of the
mm,
interesting sort of location filming for this because considering it's the epitome of swing in London.
yeah,
I'm going to
of
keep
course.
mentioning that. It was filmed all over the country, actually. I mean, obviously, Carnaby Street and Great Marlborough Street, opposite Liberties, is your big London scene here. But the case is altered. The pub is in Middlesex, The exterior of the house was Bank Hall in Bretherton, Lancashire,
Oh,
and the
right.
interior of the house was the Birkdale Palace Hotel, Southport.
Right.
So quite near to me, both of those places. Yeah,
It
interesting.
is quite an interesting thing. I know that this happens in films all the time, but it's quite interesting to think about someone. Where did you say in Lancashire that exterior was again?
Bretherton.
You open the door in Bretherton and you walk into Southport. Yeah, it's got a bit of a sort of Chronicles of That's Ken
Yeah.
Loach's Chronicles of Narnia, that isn't it?
But I mean, again, I mean, it just smacks of like two people doing. It's a cut and shut movie. I mean, obviously he's
Yeah,
filmed. They've set something in London. They're mentioned in London, but they're filming it in Lancashire and Southport. Well,
yeah.
I suppose Southport is Lancashire. I mean, I won't bore you, but Southport argue that the Southport argue that they're Lancashire, but apparently they're Merseyside. I think I'm not sure.
Okay, okay.
I do the same actually with St Helens, but I can go on for hours talking about shit like that. Yeah, so they filmed a lot of it in the northwest under Armstrong, but then when this other
Mm,
guy comes in, he suddenly starts filming on the streets of London itself, Carnaby Street, Marlborough Street, and then Middlesex as well. So he's giving it that sort of London spin. I love the scenes in Carnaby Street actually because it just
Oh, I think it definitely gives it like the right kind of time capsule appeal.
it
Yeah,
grounds it, doesn't it? It really gives
yeah,
it a sense of place. Whereas, but then again, I suppose that the downside of that is it really does date it. I
yeah.
suppose because if you
But
were
it's
to
going to be
watch,
dated anyway
it's
because
going to be
it's a
dated
British
anyway. Yeah,
slasher movie starring Frankie Avalon.
it's
You
going to
know,
be
there's
dated anyway. But if you had Armstrong's original intention, which was just in the house, and he's
yeah,
filming it, you know, an exterior and interior in Lancashire, you're going to be more. There isn't going to be that sense of place. It's going to be so there is a sort of and a sort of an evergreen sort of
it gives it a
atmosphere to it.
flavour. Yeah, I think Armstrong's version sounds like the sort of film that could be made anywhere at any time. And I know some people really prize that, and there's a reason why timeless is a compliment. But to me, I do like films which have a sort of flavour of a time and a
Yeah, yeah.
place in them.
And like you say, you've got a bunch of Dolly Birds and Frankie
Mm,
Avalon. You may as well
yes.
go. You may as well go all out and just say, well, this is where we're at. This is the time. This is the place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's it'd be interesting to see whether anybody could ever do anything with like a director's cut. I doubt anybody's going to be crying out for that, but it would be interesting to see whether that sort of material exists to do it. But apparently, originally they did say that they would try and release both films. I'd see, in a kind of Exorcist. Um,
Yeah, Dominion. Yeah.
yeah, the Rennie Harlan and the other one, sort of,
Paul
yeah,
Schrader.
Paul
Yeah.
Schrader, yeah. Whether that was ever seriously muted or not, I do not know. But
I
yeah,
mean, I would imagine it would be released around the world in various cuts anyway,
yeah,
because you are getting to this era in British horror where what the audience wants and what the international markets want is several shades harsher than what the British Board of Film Censors, as they were then, would be willing to pass. And so you have this situation that I was just describing on the podcast last episode with Robin, where directors like Norman J. Warren and
mm,
Pete Walker are just sort of preparing cuts of a film that they know will never be seen in their home country,
yeah.
like sort of Soviet dissidents preparing their letters out of the country, except
It's so
in their
true. Yeah.
case, it's like sex comedies.
And you can see the sort of inception of that here.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's that interesting point where you get to about 69, 70, and
mm,
Amicus have started to show the way that, you can do films with a horror bent in modern day settings.
yeah,
Which is Hammer was always like gothic fairy tales, weren't they? They were always the
yeah.
past. And then sort of Hammer sort of caught on to that idea in the early 70s. They did some really interesting stuff like Straight On Till Morning, which is very dark and psychological and quite sick, really.
Yeah.
Which, that's the type of film you'd imagine somebody getting stabbed in the cock and balls in,
Yes,
and nobody
definitely.
would bat an eyelid.
Yeah.
But then they would do Dracula AD 1972 and the Satanic Rites of Dracula as well, which just didn't get. I mean, that is this film, isn't it? That
Yeah.
is the kids from this film in AD 72. These
I
weird
mean,
sort of.
it's an observation that everyone has made before me, but it is very funny that Dracula AD 72 now feels more like a period piece than any of the actual
The
period
actual
set
period
Hammer
set. Yeah,
Draculas.
that is
Yeah.
so true. That is so true. The other one I want to mention as well, another pop screen reference on this is that the music is by The Pretty Things.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was an interesting one to note. I didn't really suss that until I was looking into it, and I thought, oh right, okay, so there's that. So I wrote that down as well.
Because they don't trumpet that, do they? I mean,
No,
normally if you've got a swinging London film with an actual pop band on the soundtrack, you make sure that people don't miss that, but
yeah,
doesn't
it's
happen
strange.
here for some
I mean,
reason. Yeah.
it just struck me again then we were talking about AD 72 because they've got that terrible band, haven't they? Is it called Stone or something like that? Or
Something
Under
like that, yeah.
Stone Ground or something? I can't remember. They wanted the Small Faces and they pulled out, so they ended up with these no marks. With apologies to anybody with a relationship with that band who may be listening.
I imagine that they're one of those bands where every single member went on to become someone's English teacher.
Or a jingles writer.
Oh, yeah, or a jingles writer.
Or they
Yeah.
might be like, you remember the bass in Pigeon Street? I played that.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Definitely that.
Armstrong, for all that his directorial career didn't produce many films, did have an interesting career. I mean, we talked about British horror directors being aware that the horror audience wants something a bit nastier. He went on to make the West German co-production Mark of the Devil, which is very infamous, very nasty film indeed.
Yeah, another one I've not watched for obvious reasons. I know of it, but I've not watched it. No.
I'm with you on some of the gore stuff, but I just want to say I really love body horror. Body horror is very,
Yeah,
very
I see.
meaningful to me.
I know because you're a Cronenberg fan, aren't you? But it's like
Exactly.
never
Yeah.
did it for me at all.
Yeah.
No. What's it called? Videodrome. No.
Love Videodrome. Yeah.
If you do that on this, if you've not done it already, don't go looking for me to talk about it.
We did do Videodrome
I thought
very
you would
early
have.
on.
I thought you
Yeah,
would have.
yeah.
Yeah. I gave that one a miss, obviously.
I just think it's a great documentary about what James Woods is actually like in real life.
Very true. Very true. My sort of closing statement on this film is that I remember first watching it in the sort of late 90s or early noughties, I think. And it's one of those films that used to pop up on BBC Two after like Stella Street or something like that. When you've been out for the night and you've just got in at pub's closing time and Stella Street's on, you're like, oh, brilliant. You're having your takeaway with a can of beer watching Stella Street. And then you just sort of like drifting sort of in and out of like interest of anything. And these films pop up. These horror movies used to pop up on BBC Two, and you sort of just gently fall asleep to them. It's
Yeah.
a good film to sort of just sit and have a bit of a chuckle with over a can of beer, really. If you're
Yeah.
looking for a horror film, it's probably not this, even though the title is The Haunted House of Horror. If you're looking for a
Yes.
Scooby Doo film that weirdly has some seriously brutal cock and ball stabbings in, then this is the one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've all wondered about what Scooby-Doo would be like with a few more brutal cock and ball stabbings in. So it's a recommendation.
Of course we have. Yeah, of course we have.
So, Mark, can we just have a round of where people can find you on the internet?
They can find me looking through the window behind them because it's Halloween. They can find me on Letterboxd, at The Geek Show, at We Are Cult, at various Arrow film releases, and also in Scarred for Life Volume 2, which is available from lulu.com. That is for all your fun, interesting horror and macabre things terrified you as a child needs. I feature in that. I talk about how various things in Casualty terrified me as a child.
And we're both on Letterboxd.
We're both on Letterboxd, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, so we'll be back in a fortnight's time with, I think it'll be Aidan and me talking about Round Midnight.
Are you filming that Round Midnight?
I can't believe we didn't go with that as a gimmick.
Yeah,
everyone knows podcasts are very dependent on scheduling. Yeah,
I'd have done it like After Dark. Remember on Channel 4, like Tony Wilson? I'd done it like that.
Who's wankered then if it's an episode of After Dark? Who's going to get absolutely
You're going to have to pick
hammered?
one of you to be absolutely hammered, yeah, and sort of bring the wild one and try and get off with a lesbian. You know, you're going to have to try.
Yes. Well, but yeah, we'll be back in a fortnight with that. You can donate to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show, where among so many other goodies, my X-Files reviews, not least of which, you will also get a monthly bonus episode of this show, and me and Mark are on that next month, talking about vibes with Cyndi Lauper.
Yeah, so make sure you pass the vibe test.
Indeed. But until fortnight's time, that's been your lot from Pop Screen. I've been Graham.
And I've been Mark. Goodbye. Halloween.
What your exit strategy there was going to
be. Just when in doubt, just go for Rick Mail. It's the best one to do, really, isn't it? I'm bringing the chill factor into this podcast.
I've got a light under me face.
You've got a light under your face. I just thought, well, yeah, but you live in the northeast. I just thought that was normal.
Yeah, it's a candle. There's been another power cut.
I just thought, I just thought that's what it was. I'm glad you've now cleared that up.